Perfect. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm looking forward to it as well. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Dundee in Scotland. The sun is shining, the birds are tweeting, and I am pumped to talk about the new Azure Stack HCI here. And I'm really excited to be back at Scottish Summit again. Actually, the last year at Scottish Summit was my last conference, the last thing I got to go to and present at and attend pre-COVID. So we stand in a changed world. But here we are, and here we are ready to chat again. And actually, it's a changed world from a point of view of cloud as well. Last year, I spoke about Azure Stack Hub. This year, I'm speaking about Azure Stack HCI. What does that mean? We'll get into that, but it represents a sea change in how Microsoft is viewing hybrid cloud in general, I think. Before I go into my my presentation and my demos, I just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors. We wouldn't be here without them. I haven't worked with all of these personally, but I know that without them, this wouldn't be possible. I wouldn't be able to be here speaking to you today, and you wouldn't be able to listen to all the wonderful talks that you're hearing throughout the day. So thank you to all the sponsors. We wouldn't be here without them, and they really do make this possible. So before I delve into the new Azure Stack HCI, there's one very important question that we need to ask ourselves, and that is, why are we talking about hybrid cloud? Why do we not just talk about cloud in general? And really, over the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years or so, we've seen a sea change in how people are viewing cloud and hybrid cloud all up as well. And hybrid cloud now doesn't represent a transient state or a temporary state for people on their move to the public cloud. Hybrid cloud is a de facto end state for the vast majority of people I speak to. Hybrid cloud is not going to be a stepping stone or a transient point, just one place that you go to on your cloud journey. It is the end state that you're aiming for, where you have some workloads running in the public cloud, some workloads running on premises, some workloads running at the edge. And as we take advantage of machine learning and AI and IoT and all these edge capabilities, as well as bringing things to the fore across the traditional on-premises world, how we do that in a consistent way across the public cloud, across on-premises, and across the edge becomes increasingly important. And if we look at the Azure public cloud from a global perspective, I had to update this yesterday, by the way, because we've now crossed the threshold of over 70 data center regions announced or live for public Azure. That's crazy. I used to update this every time there was a new data center region added. That got too onerous going through all my decks, so then I changed it to every time there's a new 10 data center regions. We've just crossed into 71 Azure data center regions announced now, which is incredible. That's actually more than AWS and Google combined in terms of data center footprint. But actually, when you overlay it on a world map, it can become pretty stark. So first up, there are places that we're never going to have Azure regions, and we need to be able to fill in that part of the map there accordingly with Azure consistent capabilities. But even where there is Azure in region, there are still some very good reasons why Azure data centers and Microsoft data centers are not the right place to run workloads. And if we look at Microsoft's history, Microsoft's heritage, Microsoft is not a born in the cloud company. Unlike AWS, unlike Google, who were born in the cloud and have always existed there, Microsoft is a born in the enterprise company. Microsoft was born on premises with all of us in the IT industry and have grown out to the public cloud from there. And with that has come a very strong understanding of what it takes to run enterprise workloads, where some workloads best run, and really core to Azure. One of Azure's strongest value propositions is that hybrid is core to its DNA. Hybrid has always been part of Azure. Hybrid has always been built into Azure right from the get-go. And as a result, hybrid does not just mean one thing from a Microsoft perspective. Hybrid does not just mean one product. If you look at AWS, if you look at Google, we have AWS Outposts, Google Anthos. These are hybrid capabilities being built back from the public cloud to on-premises. Azure has a portfolio of capabilities for bringing hybrid services to on-premises with that key understanding of what hybrid means to our customers today. And when we look at that portfolio, there are a few specific products in here which are here to deliver some very specific use cases and capabilities. And we'll start off on the right-hand side here with Azure Stack Edge. Azure Stack Edge is a first-party appliance from Microsoft. You log into your Azure portal, you go into the Azure subscription, you say, I want an Azure Stack Edge, and Microsoft will ship you a 1U appliance, a 1U server to ship to your premises to run some very specific workloads on. It comes with an FPGA built in, the same one as you get within Azure for doing some AI and machine learning tasks. And in preview, it can come with a GPU as well. The reason it comes with an FPGA or a GPU is because it's very specifically designed for doing Azure machine learning and IoT type services at the edge. It's there for when you want to be doing video and image data inferencing at the edge, and you need to do that in a very timely manner. So for example, let's say you're in a factory or at a petrol station or somewhere where you have lots of video cameras, and you want to be able to process data from those video cameras as it's being generated. So you don't want to send all that up to the public cloud, because that's going to saturate your bandwidth and it's going to incur some very significant latency penalties. We don't want to do that. So Azure Stack Edge is there to bring those machine learning and AI capabilities to the edge to run on premises where the data is being generated, run those through some existing pre-built models, whether they're Microsoft generated models or models that you've created yourself, and then generate some output from that right where the data is being generated without saturating your bandwidth, without incurring latency penalties. So maybe this is in a factory and you're monitoring some a production line with products coming through a conveyor belt. Maybe they're coming through very, very quickly, and you're doing some machine learning, watching those products as they come through to watch for any defects. When you spot a defect, you want that to shut down instantly. Time is money, and the faster that can go, the better. And so you don't want to be able to have to wait for that to go all the way to the public cloud, be processed, and come all the way back. You want to do it then and there on the factory floor, and that's where Azure Stack Edge absolutely shines. When you want to do video and image inferencing at the edge, we have Azure Stack Edge, and it's absolutely brilliant for it. For pretty much any other workload that we're talking about, we have Azure Stack Hub and Azure Stack HCI, each targeting very different use cases. So Azure Stack Hub, which is what I spoke about at Scottish Summit last year, is really there to bring Azure services on premises. It's there for when you want to use Azure, but you can't. And that's the crux of it. You absolutely want to use Azure. You want to use Azure services. You want to use the Azure IaaS and a subset of the PaaS services. You want to use Azure APIs. You have expertise and skills in Azure. Maybe you have Azure developers. Maybe you have Azure operations staff. Maybe you're completely bought into the Azure way of doing things. You want to run everything as infrastructure as code. You want to use specific Azure applications, but for some reason, you're unable to do it in a Microsoft data center. Now, that could be because of data sovereignty or regulatory compliance reasons. It could be because of latency reasons again. It could be because of connectivity reasons. Maybe you just have no connectivity to the public cloud at all. Maybe you're in a submarine at the bottom of a sea, or more commonly in an oil rig or in a ship, or even just in the Highlands of Scotland where there is poor connectivity and you're unable to get to an Azure data center in order to run your workloads. What Azure Stack Hub does is it brings a mini Azure region to run in your facilities to bring that Azure goodness to wherever you need to run it. So you get the same Azure portal experience, you get the same Azure APIs, you get the same IaaS experience and a subset of the PaaS capabilities as well. And you can bring those Azure applications and that Azure way of doing things and run it wherever you want to, whether that is in your own data center, at the edge, in the back of a truck, at the top of a mountain. Doesn't matter. As long as you can provide power, you can have Azure anywhere you need it. And that's very specifically because you want to use Azure, but for some reason you can't do it in a Microsoft data center. We see that as a pretty niche but very valid use case just now. There aren't a vast number of people who are 100% bought into Azure and want to bring that on premises, but where that need exists is very real. And I've worked with hundreds of customers on this very scenario, bringing Azure to where they need to, and where we implement that, it's transformational. Having the ability to run things in the same way on premises and in the cloud, completely consistently with the same operations model, with the same development model, it's absolutely transformational. Azure Stack HCI fits somewhere in the middle of all this. Azure Stack HCI is really there to, first of all, modernize how you run workloads on premises. So take an existing Hyper-V estate, for example, and modernize that into a hyper-converged infrastructure, but then connect it to Azure Public and make it better as a result. So this is infrastructure modernization connected to Azure and made better as a result. It is not just a cloud-native platform. It's not just for running Azure workloads or Azure VMs. This is for running any traditional virtualization workload plus cloud-native workloads and connect it to Azure and make it better as a result. While Azure Stack Hub is there when you can't use Azure, Azure Stack HCI is there for when you can use Azure and you need to run things on premises as well, and it becomes better as a result. If we delve a little into the past of Azure Stack HCI, Azure Stack HCI was the new version we're talking about here, was launched and announced by Microsoft in December last year. It is very new as a product, but it's not at the same time. This is the evolution of Hyper-V on premises. And this really started with Windows Server 2016, when things like Storage Spaces Direct and the new software-defined networking stack and things like that came to being. And we brought out some reference architectures called the WSSD program, the Windows Server Software-Defined Reference Program, really to help people to start to build hyperconverged infrastructure, leveraging Windows Server 2016, to deliver that sort of infrastructure modernization. And this was very much buy some servers, install Windows on it in a sort of reference architecture, and away you go. From there, we started to develop some ready nodes. So ready nodes are a more validated solution where we've tested the software and the hardware working together, and we say, yes, the Azure Stack HCI features will work well on this hardware, and we'll make sure that updates will work well for that. We continued that story through 2019 when Windows Server 2019 was released, and again updated the ready nodes there for Storage Spaces Direct to deliver that. And then Microsoft launched the first version of Azure Stack HCI, and we say Azure Stack HCI here in quotes because this is still running Windows Server at this time. What you would do is you would buy a validated Azure Stack HCI solution from a hardware OEM, and you would install Windows Server on it, Windows Server 2019 at that time, and then you would enable the requisite HCI features. So you would enable Hyper-V, you would enable Storage Spaces Direct, you would enable the software-defined networking features that you wanted, but fundamentally this was full-fat Windows Server with the hyperconverged infrastructure roles enabled on it to deliver those services. Where we've advanced to now, as of December, is that Azure Stack HCI is now a purpose-built operating system specifically for running HCI environments only. This is not Windows Server that you install. This is the Azure Stack HCI operating system that you install. And this brings a large number of benefits to bear. The best way to think of this is really like ESXi for Microsoft. This is a purpose-built operating system specifically for delivering hyperconverged infrastructure at its best. And this does a few things right off the bat. First of all, this is a much smaller footprint than full-fat Windows Server. So from a resource perspective, from a security perspective, you're already in a better place there. From an attack perspective, from an update perspective, and so on there as well. You're already in a better place there. But fundamentally, and more importantly, the Azure Stack HCI team are able to bring new innovations to bear significantly faster now because they don't have to worry about breaking Windows Server. If you think about it, in the past, the previous version of Azure Stack HCI here, which was a number of roles installed on Windows Server, every single feature that was added there needed to make sure it didn't break Windows Server because obviously there are an awful lot of customers out there, a lot of companies out there who really depend on Windows Server, full fat as it is. So if you bring a new feature into there to enhance Azure Stack HCI and it breaks Windows Server, that's not a good place to be. As a result, we were really seeing new features and capabilities coming, let's say every 3 years or so, from Windows Server 2016 to 2019 to vNext, and so on there. The Windows Server lifecycle is fairly defined, and we know and understand it pretty well. The lifecycle for the Azure Stack HCI operating system, the new Azure Stack HCI OS, is much more flexible. So instead of having a 3-year lifecycle, we'll be looking at new features and updates multiple times a year, much more in line with what you'd expect from a cloud platform there rather than a traditional enterprise virtualization platform. And this brings some interesting nuances here because there are lots of people out there who have been running Azure Stack HCI, I'll call it Windows Server HCI from now on, who have been running Windows Server HCI for years now, and are looking at the new Azure Stack HCI and wondering, where does this fit in with what I do, what I want to do, where I've come from? Is this part of my world, or do I stick with what I've always known and loved? And then if we split out the future of Azure Stack HCI and Windows Server, actually they each have a very specific purpose and use case here. So Azure Stack HCI and Windows Server both have a very exciting roadmap of new releases. That's the first thing. Windows Server doesn't go away. Windows Server is still here. It delivers a huge number of capabilities and values to customers around the world. The only thing that's been split out from it is the ability to run hyperconverged infrastructure, and Azure Stack HCI is able to do that and advance that much, much better than Windows Server will be able to going forward. But they both have an exciting roadmap of new releases. They're both critical. Neither goes away. They're both really super important. Azure Stack HCI is really focused on being the best virtualization host. That is its raison d'etre. That's why it's there. It is there to be the best place to run Hyper-V workloads, to run Microsoft-based workloads in a virtualized environment. That is why it's there. Windows Server serves a huge range of other purposes. It is the best guest to run in any virtualization platform and traditional servers as well. So if you want to run a domain controller, you want to run file servers, you want to run SQL Server, you want to run anything that's run on Windows in the past, that still runs on Windows Server. Azure Stack HCI is specifically for being a virtualization host. And you will have many Windows Server virtual machines running on top of Azure Stack HCI, but no longer is it Windows Server under the covers here. It is the new Azure Stack HCI operating system. And this really is the future of Hyper-V virtualization. This is super important because Hyper-V isn't being removed from Windows Server, but you're going to see innovation slow down in that arena over time in Windows Server. The future of Hyper-V virtualization, software-defined data centers, software-defined storage through Storage Spaces Direct, the software-defined networking stack, new features and capabilities, new integrations with Azure, these will be focused on Azure Stack HCI, and that is where all the new innovation is going to come. That's where all the future-focused development is going to be. So we don't take anything away from Windows Server just now, but future innovation goes into Azure Stack HCI, and that's super important from a planning and implementation perspective and knowing what's coming down the road as well. For every other role other than Hyper-V and its associated roles, those still run within Windows Server. So you're still running IIS, file servers, DNS, DHCP, Active Directory domain services, things like that within your Windows Server guests, running on top of Azure Stack HCI OS as the best virtualization host there. And you can run whatever virtual machine workloads that you want on top of Azure Stack HCI. So this could be Windows VMs, Linux VMs, basically any workload, any virtual machine that you want to run on Azure Stack HCI will absolutely run on top of there as well. And it runs on bare metal. This is the key thing with Azure Stack HCI. It is designed to run on bare metal to deliver a hyper-converged infrastructure, to deliver the best of breed on-premises infrastructure for what you need there. Whereas Windows Server will run anywhere. It'll run in a VM, it'll run on bare metal, wherever you need it to run. It will run to deliver those features and capabilities that it needs to. And when we look at hyper-converged infrastructure all up, what really is its purpose? Hyper-converged infrastructure all up, and you'll see I've very cunningly blanked out the nameplate here, so I'm not favoring any one specific OEM. But hyper-converged infrastructure is something that you buy from a hardware OEM to deliver some specific outcomes. The first one is that you want to streamline and simplify your operations. You want to make sure that how you manage your hardware on premises is as easy as it can possibly be. You don't want this to be a complex operation. You don't want to have multiple teams running networking and storage and server and having to interplay between these different teams. You don't want to maintain that expertise. You don't want to have to know, if I install this LSI driver this month, will it break something 2 months down the line, and I need to be an expert in doing that. No, these are not areas where you bring value to your business. You bring value to your business higher up the value chain. Hardware is hardware, and it should just run, it should just work, and we should make sure that as much value as we can add to that, we do, so that you can focus up the value chain where you deliver the most value. And by the way, that's why things like Azure and AWS and so on are so popular and so and have grown so fast and so well, because they abstract away all these underlying things that you no longer have to care about, and you can focus high up the value chain. With a hyper-converged infrastructure like Azure Stack HCI, that's what we're doing as well. We are abstracting away the day-to-day difficult management of that to make it as easy to manage as possible. Yes, you still have to power it. Yes, you still have to cool it. Yes, you still have to apply patches with a couple of clicks. But by and large, this is an extremely simple proposition to run to make sure that you can deliver that cloud-like capabilities on premises. And when I say cloud-like capabilities, what we're really talking about here is Azure-like capabilities, because this isn't just for running your traditional virtual machines. Azure Stack HCI is here to bring Azure capabilities into your data center as well. So if you want to run Azure SQL managed instances in Azure Stack HCI, go nuts, go for it. If you want to bring Azure Policy to bear, use Azure Monitor to monitor this. If you want to use Azure Backup, Azure Site Recovery on this, go nuts again. You can absolutely do that. And these are all very specifically integrated into Azure Stack HCI out of the box. These are not little add-ons off to the side. This is designed to be an Azure integrated appliance. It's delivered as an Azure service. And fundamentally, it's designed to be an enterprise class experience as well. This is not just some servers that you install the Azure Stack HCI operating system on. The OEMs have worked very closely with Microsoft to deliver this as an integrated system. to make sure that you can get this get as much of that cloud-like experience out of the box as possible. And if we delve down under the covers here into what this really looks like, there are a bunch of different levels to this that I think is worth splitting out here. So down at the bottom, you have the hardware. And you buy that hardware from a specific OEM. I forgot to blank out Dell EMC there. That's my bad. But that's okay. I do work for them in the Azure Stack HCI engineering and product group there. Down at the bottom, we have the hardware, and that's fundamentally what you install in your data center and run the Azure Stack HCI on. And on top of that, you have installed this new Azure Stack HCI operating system. The Azure Stack HCI OS is what enables all the features which will make the HCI system tick. So it includes Hyper-V, it includes Storage Spaces Direct, it includes software-defined networking, scale-out file services, VM shielding. All the capabilities that you need to run the hyperconverged infrastructure are included within the Azure Stack HCI OS. And the licensing for this is extremely straightforward. Azure Stack HCI is billed as an Azure service, so you register this against an Azure subscription and is billed against your Azure subscription at $10 per physical core per month or your local equivalent. This is incredibly easy to plan for. You get every single feature in Azure Stack HCI plus the management suite for that $10 per core per month on top of the hardware, of course. You buy the hardware, then you license on top of that. So for $10 per physical core per month, you get unlimited use of Hyper-V, unlimited use of the Storage Spaces Direct features, unlimited use of all the software-defined networking capabilities. You get Windows Admin Center in there as well. You get all the management and monitoring capabilities built in there. And it is that one price that you pay there. Once you've licensed your Azure Stack HCI operating system, you need to look at what you want to run on top of it. So first up, you could run virtual machines on top of it. This could be Linux virtual machines, in which case maybe there's no additional license cost there at all. Maybe your entire license cost is just that $10 per core per month. Super cost effective. If you're running Windows Server virtual machines, you have a few different options there. So number one is that if you only have a few Windows Server virtual machines, maybe you're running in an edge location, maybe you're running at a very small scale, and you only have 5-6 VMs, you can license that with Windows Server Standard there. If you're running a lot more Windows Server virtual machines, then you can license that with Windows Server Data Center and get unlimited use of virtualization rights on top of that whole infrastructure. If you watch Microsoft Ignite next week, there are going to be some very interesting announcements around other licensing options there for Azure Stack HCI specifically, which are going to make Azure Stack HCI the most attractive place to run Windows Server virtual machines on premises, bar none. So super exciting time to be working in the hybrid innovation space here. The ability to run Windows Server and Linux VMs in a hyperconverged infrastructure, leveraging the new Azure Stack HCI OS for just $10 per core per month is frankly mind-blowing. The capabilities that you get there and the low cost that enables as well. But this isn't just a traditional virtualization platform. This is also bringing some cloud-native capabilities here, and this is where it gets really, really interesting for me. First up, we're bringing the Azure Kubernetes service to Azure Stack HCI as well. This is available in preview just now. You can install and test this, and it will be going GA in the not too distant future as well. Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS, is one of the fastest growing services. Actually, it's the fastest growing service in public Azure. Bringing that fastest growing service into Azure Stack HCI is super important. First up, this delivers a managed Kubernetes environment to you. So in the same way as Azure manages the back end of the Kubernetes infrastructure and they manage the update and the ongoing maintenance of that, that is done for you within Azure Stack HCI as well. This is delivering AKS to you within your environment here. And this is important for, let's say, two core reasons. Number one, let's say three core reasons. Number one is it enables you to do that movement from your traditional virtual machines into AKS there. So you can start to modernize in place within that one environment and bring workloads from VMs into AKS and get that consistent Azure management experience there, that consistent way of delivering Kubernetes services within Azure Stack HCI. They will run side by side. They will be able to talk to each other, and you can deliver the best of the old world and the new world side by side in tandem as they go. So you have the ability to bring your workloads in there. You have the ability, secondly, to develop brand new cloud native applications within here as well. So if you want to develop new Kubernetes-based, container-based applications, Azure Stack HCI is a wonderful place to do that on premises, knowing that you're doing this in a consistent way with how it's done in public Azure as well. Being able to bring those Kubernetes instances up to the public cloud and manage them in the same way is super powerful. And being able to spread your workloads across whatever sites you need to, whether that's some workloads in the public cloud, some in an edge location, some in the back of a truck, some in your core data center, and having them run, delivered, managed, developed, and deployed in a very consistent way. Super powerful, but to be able to do that. Consistency is the most important thing that hybrid cloud delivers to us. Consistency in management, development, support, wherever you're running these workloads, and it's really cool that we can do this with AKS now as well. But the place where this gets really, really interesting is when we start to look at how Azure is decoupling Azure from Azure, if I can put it that way. Azure has always been a very tightly coupled infrastructure. So if you wanted to deploy an Azure SQL managed instance, you could only do that in the Azure public cloud. The service was coupled to the management plane, was coupled to the Azure data center, and never the three would be intertwined, would be untangled there. They were always intertwined. We're in a state now where Microsoft is very intentionally and very cleverly disentangling these different things. So splitting out the control plane and the workload from the data center and making sure that actually you can run these things wherever you want, as long as you have a Kubernetes environment to run it within. So within AKS on Azure Stack HCI, we can start to bring things like Azure SQL managed instances, Azure Postgres, and more capabilities over time will come, decoupling these Azure services from running inside Azure, but still delivering the exact same service managed from public Azure, but running in your data center. So this is incredibly interesting when you think about if you move a bunch of existing virtual machine workloads into Azure Stack HCI, and you've got a whole load of SQL within there, and maybe you're not an expert DBA, or you don't want to spend all your time managing SQL under the covers. Well, why not just deploy an Azure SQL managed instance into AKS there and consume that as the SQL service to your VMs, move your database workloads into that, still run your other VMs exactly as you always have, but now you have Azure SQL managed instances running in AKS here, managed from public Azure, and you're getting the best of both worlds here. You're getting your workloads running where they need to. You're getting that SQL service run as a managed instance. So patch and update is done by Microsoft within here. HA and DR are inherent. Backup is built in. The ability to scale as much as you want within the confines of your hardware, of course, is built in there as well. All the features, every single feature in Azure SQL managed instances in the public cloud, now available within AKS and Azure Stack HCI, delivering that Azure experience where you need it. And in fact, if I jump across to my other screen here, if you go to the Microsoft Docs here for Azure Arc and specifically look at Azure Arc enabled data services, you'll see exactly how to deploy this and how to make it available. I'm saying to do this within AKS because AKS is a robust managed Kubernetes environment. Actually, Azure Arc enabled data services will run in any Kubernetes environment. So this is decoupling Azure from Azure to run in any Kubernetes environment. So if you wanted to run Azure SQL managed instances inside EKS in AWS, you can absolutely do that. Azure Stack HCI makes it extremely easy on premises and Azure consistent there as well. And definitely the best way to do that on premises. But Azure SQL managed instances, PostgreSQL, Hyperscale, these are the first two capabilities being brought to bear in Kubernetes. And this is not the end of this. This is the start of this journey. Why SQL and Postgres to start with? Well, it's because data is sticky and data is the hardest thing to move to the public cloud. Customers who have terabytes, hundreds of terabytes, petabytes of data find it difficult to move that to the cloud. So what Microsoft are enabling is the ability to bring the cloud to them, to bring the exact same features and capabilities to their data center, to modernize that data workload, and then build applications around it, leveraging Azure services to do so. So Azure is not just tightly coupled in a Microsoft data center. Azure is a suite of hybrid and multi-cloud capabilities, which can be brought to bear wherever you need to. And if I jump into my Azure Stack HCI instance here, I have Azure Stack HCI running here now. I've got a 2-node cluster running a bunch of virtual machines. Actually, the virtual machines running within here are by and large running an AKS cluster. So when you deploy your AKS cluster into Azure Stack HCI, you can see all of the VMs that go into making that, but you never have to log into those, manage those. They are run and managed for you by Microsoft. And I can manage this AKS cluster here just exactly as I would any AKS cluster. So just using kubectl, for example, or any other Kubernetes management tools that you want to there. And the way that you deploy Kubernetes clusters here is literally within Windows Admin Center. You go to the AKS tab here, and you go Add Cluster, and it walks you through a very short wizard asking you what you want to name it, asking you for your credentials, asking you what the networking setup should look like, and if you want to attach persistent storage. And once you've done that, you click go, and it will deploy your Kubernetes cluster for you, and it's just that simple. And once it's deployed, again, it's managed as a service there for you. So super powerful way to bring Kubernetes on premises and run it side by side with an existing traditional virtual machine infrastructure there as well. Truly bringing the best of the old world and best of the new together to run side by side there. And actually, if we look at one of my Azure Stack HCI hosts here, what you'll see when I go to manage these hosts is that this is not just focused on running the Azure Stack HCI here. You'll see that there are a whole bunch of Azure services integrated into here as well. Directly integrated into the management experience of Azure Stack HCI is the ability to leverage Azure Backup, Azure File Sync, Azure Monitor, Security Center, and more within here. And the integration and setup of these is inherent. It's designed to be part of the solution, not designed to be something which is sitting off to the side. So we'll see that I've got Azure Site Recovery deployed within here, for example. So if I want to protect one of my virtual machines within here, I just tick it and I say replicate using Azure Site Recovery. And I say I want to use an existing storage account, or I create a new storage account, and I protect the VM. If I create a new one, I'll just say demo delete, please. Apparently I have not configured everything within, and that's not valid. And demo account 1, 2, 3. That's probably already taken. 1, 2, 3, 9. This is one of those wonderful things in Azure. There we go. So I have my storage account ready. I'm ready to protect it. I click Protect VM, and that's it. This VM is now going to be replicated to public Azure to fail over when I need to, so that the inherent disaster recovery capabilities built into Azure Stack HCI make this incredibly attractive for when you want to run workloads on premises, but be able to very easily fail over to the public cloud when you need to. And typically the reasons that you wouldn't run in the public cloud there are because you're latency sensitive or cost sensitive as well. These things can be very cost effective to run on premises as well. But in a disaster scenario, you can take the brunt of the extra cost, or you can take the latency penalty, or your application will be degraded in some way, but you can handle that in a disaster recovery scenario. So things will run best within Azure Stack HCI, but when they need to fail over in a disaster, you can set that up extremely easily. Directly integrated into Windows Admin Center here. This is not an Azure adjacent thing or an Azure instead of thing. This is an Azure service delivering Azure capabilities to you to make sure that what you run on premises is a part of Azure and is inherently integrated into there and a part of that story there as well. So I said that we have SQL managed instances here. If I log into my Azure portal, and this is portal.azure.com, you'll see here. If I look at the services I've been using recently, yes, I can deploy a SQL managed instance in public Azure. I have always been able to do that, and I've done that many, many times in the past. But I also have this ability to do SQL managed instances, Azure Arc here. And this is what allows me to deploy that exact same SQL managed instance into my Azure Stack HCI environment. And this SQL demo instance here is actually running inside this AKS cluster that I have running inside my Azure Stack HCI here. So if I look at the virtual machines here, there's an AKS cluster running within here, and running within that, within this AKS demo cluster here. So you'll see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 worker nodes here. Running inside those 4 worker nodes is Azure SQL managed instances. Now, I never have to log into that, manage that, deploy it, worry about protection of that, worry about how I scale that. That's built in just as it is within public Azure. And frankly, for me, that's one of the most exciting things that's happening in the public cloud just now. The ability to bring these same services to run inside Azure Stack HCI as we have in the public cloud, decoupling Azure from Azure, I think is the future of hybrid cloud. Being able to log into public Azure, see my SQL managed instance here, whether it's running on premises or in Azure, and getting the exact same capabilities is super powerful, and is only going to accelerate Microsoft's existing lead in the hybrid cloud space significantly. So we have the ability to run virtualized applications, we have the ability to run cloud native applications, and we have the ability to run Azure services now within here. And all these things come together to run your applications. And your applications are now not limited by old technologies, new technologies, whether it's running in a Microsoft data center, whether it's running in your data center. These things run where you need to, giving you the capabilities that you need when you need them, where you need them. And I am super excited by that. So this is absolutely an enterprise class hyperconverged infrastructure. It is here to deliver the most resilient, reliable, cost-effective services that you can get in a hyperconverged infrastructure on premises today. And this is the future and the evolution of Hyper-V. This is new, but it's not brand new. This is an evolution of the existing Hyper-V journey here. And one of the things I always find super interesting is the fact that Azure is Hyper-V's biggest customer in the world. Most of the innovation that we see in Hyper-V is specifically driven by Azure and Azure at hyperscale, and we see Hyper-V being used at hyperscale reliably, consistently to deliver Azure services, and we're leveraging that exact same hypervisor on premises now. So we have the same innovations being brought on premises to deliver the same services and same capabilities, and it truly is an Azure hybrid world now. We still have Storage Spaces Direct for running fast enterprise-grade storage. Storage Spaces Direct is actually specifically tweaked by Microsoft to run SQL Server, very high performance. So if you want to run SQL Server on premises, including managed instances, running that within Storage Spaces Direct on Azure Stack HCI will guarantee some extremely high performance environments here. And the software-defined networking stack it's not the exact same one as in public Azure, because that's designed for hyperscale, but it's leveraging a lot of the same lessons that we learn in the Azure public cloud. So this Azure-inspired software-defined networking is designed to bring a lot of the same thought processes and capabilities and then integrate it with Azure in a very seamless way as well. Now, I said earlier that Azure Stack HCI is able to be innovated upon significantly faster than we've been able to do in the past with Windows Server. And one of the things that we've been lacking in the Windows Server HCI for many years now has been the ability to do stretch clustering. So the ability to have two different Azure Stack HCI clusters deployed on two different sites, maybe in different cities, or even within the same city, but on two separate sites, having active-active or active-passive failover and replication between those, and the ability to automatically failover from one cluster to another in the event of disaster. That has been missing. That is now available within Azure Stack HCI. So we bring stretch clustering for disaster recovery to Azure Stack HCI. That's an example of the faster pace of innovation that we now have with the new operating system, and new innovations like that will just continue to accelerate and come over time as well. It's very exciting. So we have this infrastructure which is designed to deliver an extremely easy to manage, extremely small footprint, high performance, low cost, easy to manage infrastructure here. And then it is designed, very, very much designed to be Azure hybrid by design. This is not designed to be an instead of Azure. This is designed to be part of Azure, and you pay for it as part of your Azure subscription as well. When you log into the Azure portal, you will see your Azure Stack HCI instances within Azure. You can monitor and manage and see all of your Azure Stack HCI clusters in the Azure portal there. So if you imagine that you're deploying across lots of different branch office sites, deploying across different retail stores, across different branch offices for banks, across different factories, across different petrol stations, across so many places where edge infrastructure and remote infrastructure is run, having those all aggregated in the Azure portal and being able to monitor those, manage those, and look at what's going on with those in the Azure portal is a super powerful capability there. And being able to bring Azure governance, Azure policy, and Azure tagging to those as well is really cool as well. Because this is paid for as an Azure subscription, your $10 per core per month, this is also always up to date. So you don't have to pay for updates on top of this. You're always eligible for any new updates. So when they're released, they will be available to you. And this is an evergreen service here that you're always getting the latest and greatest capabilities here. And I showed some of the native Azure integrations. I'm going to show a couple of those more in a second, but this is designed to be natively integrated with Azure as well. So there are many Azure services which are designed to run things on premises and in the public cloud, and being able to bring one pane of glass to manage that within Windows Admin Center is super powerful. And this doesn't require you to throw away all your old knowledge. So if you have been on this Hyper-V journey for some years up until now, or you're used to running things in Windows Admin Center, or you use System Center, or you're just used to running Windows Server workloads, this is all very familiar to you as well. So you can leverage your existing knowledge around Storage Spaces Direct. You can leverage your existing knowledge around how to administer this with Windows Admin Center and System Center, PowerShell, familiar enterprise on-premises capabilities there. And you can continue to leverage third-party tooling that you're using already. So if you're already using something to back up your Hyper-V estate, that will work with Azure Stack HCI as well. So this brings the old world and the new together, brings them into a true mashed up hybrid environment there, but it doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It does enable you to leverage your existing knowledge as well, and then upskill into the cloud world as well. It doesn't require you to do an all or nothing move to cloud. You can do it at your pace in your time as you want in there as well. If we just jump back to my my demo environment here, one thing that I really wanted to show is actually how you can get going with testing some Azure Stack HCI environments here. So the first thing that you want to do is go to github.com/Microsoft/MSLab. The Microsoft Lab here, designed and built and managed by Jaromir here, is designed to make it very easy to get going with Azure Stack HCI specifically. In order to do that, all you have to do is download a couple of scripts from the releases section of the repo and walk through the instructions here. This will deploy a nested virtualized Azure Stack HCI implementation on your own device. The required specs are very, very small. If you have, I think, 8 gigs of RAM and 80 gigs of hard drive space, so most modern laptops, you can deploy an Azure Stack HCI lab here. And all this is going to do within these scripts is ask you to walk through a few different PowerShell scripts. So you run the prerequisite script, you run the create parent disk script, and you run the deploy script. And after that, you will have an Azure Stack HCI environment running here with a domain controller and with a Windows 10 VM for managing it as well. And all that will be built and run and deployed automatically for you. It's incredibly simple, incredibly powerful way to get going with Azure Stack HCI and then test out the capabilities of it within there. So all of the capabilities that I'm looking at within here, whether it's with AKS, the Azure Hybrid Services, integrations, running my cluster here, checking out Storage Replica, integrating Azure Monitor, all these capabilities that I'm showing and testing here, including running AKS within Azure Stack HCI. I've deployed all of these using WS Lab. Sorry, it's been renamed MS Lab. WS Lab has been renamed to MS Lab as of 2 days ago. We can see that there. WS Lab rename MS Lab. It'll take a while for me to get used to that. And it's been renamed from WS Lab, Windows Server Lab, to MS Lab because Windows Server is no longer the foundation of Azure Stack HCI. The Azure Stack HCI operating system is now the underpinnings of Azure Stack HCI there. So you do your deployment, and that gives you a vanilla Azure Stack HCI infrastructure to play within. But then on top of that, you can then run various scenarios within that. So there are different scenario scripts here that you can run through to deploy and test some different things. So if you wanted to test BitLocker running on a StorageSpaces Direct cluster, you would go into that. You would run through your 2 scripts that it provides, run through the overview there, run through the walkthrough there, and that would enable BitLocker on your S2T cluster. If you want to test out Kubernetes in Azure Stack HCI, exactly the same. You take your scenario script here, you run through that step by step, exactly as it tells you to here, and after you're done, you will have Azure Stack HCI running AKS within your lab environment there. So MS Lab makes it extremely easy to get going with Azure Stack HCI. All you need is your own laptop. As long as you have 8 gigs of RAM and 80 gigs of hard drive space, that's all you need. And this GitHub repo here will walk you through every step of the way what you need to do in order to deploy and manage that there. So super, super important there. So in my last minute or so, if I had to sum up what is Azure Stack HCI, I guess for me, first of all, this is the future of on-premises virtualization for Microsoft. Yes, there are still other ways to do on-premises virtualization for Microsoft. You can still install Windows Server 2019 and soon Windows Server 2022. In fact, you can download that now for testing, and you can still enable the Hyper-V role, and you can still enable these other features, but that is not the future direction of travel for on-premises virtualization for Microsoft. The future of on-premises virtualization for Microsoft is Azure Stack HCI, and that is where future innovations will all be landing as well. So new capabilities, new features, new Azure integrations will be landing in Azure Stack HCI, and that is the direction of travel there. Not just that, new licensing capabilities there as well. I can't believe how excited I am about licensing and some of the things that are going to get announced next week. That tells me I need to get outside into this beautiful Scottish weather, I guess. The next thing for me is that this is an enterprise-grade, high-performance, affordable, and easy-to-manage platform. This is not a cobbled-together DIY virtualization infrastructure. This is very specifically designed to be an enterprise-class appliance here. And actually, there is an Azure Stack HCI catalog. So aka.ms/Azure Stack HCI catalog. And if you log into that, if you go to that, you can have a look and see all the different OEMs which deliver Azure Stack HCI. You can get it as a validated node wherein they say, yes, this will run Azure Stack HCI, off you go, do it yourself. or you can buy it as an integrated system. And as an integrated system, you get a whole bunch of additional capabilities. In fact, they're listed on the site as well. If you click into any of these, you get what the integrated system capabilities are, including things like pre-installation of Azure Stack HCI, a fully managed, fully designed multi-node solution, full stack updates. So the process for updating both the OEM and the Microsoft updates is 4 clicks within an integrated system, and an ongoing testing validation with Microsoft and OEM, and a support agreement between Microsoft and OEM, all built into the enterprise-grade appliances there, integrated systems there within Azure Stack HCI. And finally, this is an Azure service. This is a core part of any Azure strategy. Azure doesn't just mean a Microsoft data center. Azure means a suite of capabilities brought to wherever you need them to run when you need them, how you want to run them. So Azure Stack HCI is the best way to run those Azure services on premises. So when you need to take those capabilities out of a Microsoft data center, that is where Azure Stack HCI absolutely shines. So with that, I will say once again, thank you to our sponsors. Without them, we wouldn't be here. And I'm very grateful to them for the opportunity and for everyone here for listening. Thank you very much. Thank you to Scottish Summit for having me again. And I look forward to next year as well. Thank you.